the beginning, Edward Snowden and his supporters, including the Guardian's Glenn Greenwald, have insisted that the media and public keep their focus on the massive surveillance state that Snowden revealed, rather than the maneuverings of the man himself. But their calls have, to a degree, fallen on deaf ears. Focus on the 30-year-old intelligence analyst has eclipsed that of the surveillance programs he brought to light. In large part, that's because Snowden's flight pattern has made him a pawn in a diplomatic chess match between the U.S. and Russia.
He is not a human rights activist. He is not a dissident. He's accused of leaking classified information. The Russian government has an opportunity here to work with us through the normal channels to expel Mr. Snowden. This should not be something that causes long-term problems for U.S.-Russian relations.
Doing his part to inflame international tensions, Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday called for a boycott of next year's Winter Olympics in Russia if President Putin refuses to hand over Snowden. Today, Putin said Snowden's request for temporary asylum is working its way through proper channels, but that any right to asylum will be revoked if Snowden discloses further material. It is a condition that Snowden appears to have agreed to. Snowden's asylum requests have many questioning his motivations, but as BuzzFeed's Ben Smith argues, Snowden's flight and its surrounding geopolitics are a good story. What he made public is a better one. And on that front, 15 senators are now pushing for greater transparency from the FISA court. And at least 5 federal lawsuits challenging the NSA's data mining programs are currently working their way through the courts. As for public opinion, a majority of the public sees Snowden as a whistleblower rather than a traitor, and some are questioning whether a U.S. jury would even convict Snowden. Former State Department lawyer David Posen writes that one source of concern is the jury. Jurors might be tempted to acquit Snowden, not because they believe he is factually innocent, but because they believe he was morally justified. Still, a majority of Americans also believe that the NSA programs are necessary to keep Americans safe and see a loss of privacy as the inevitable cost of living in the 21st century. As Frank Rich argues in New York Magazine, the overwhelming majority of the public is, quote, begging for its privacy to be invaded and, God willing, to be exposed in every gory detail before the largest audience possible. Joining me now from Rio de Janeiro is columnist for The Guardian, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us, and I want to get right to the news of today, which is Snowden has said, he has told the Russian lawyer who's advising him, I will fulfill President Putin's condition. As someone who has been in touch with Snowden, is it your understanding that Snowden is agreeing to no further leaks, or is he simply maintaining his belief that the leaks are not harming national security?
I think it's both. He said from the beginning that the condition that he not harm the United States was a very easy one for him to fulfill because nothing he's done has harmed the United States. Quite the contrary, it's strengthened the United States by exposing what its political leaders are doing in the dark, which strengthens democracy and brings about transparency. But I think there's a real misconception as well on the question of will he continue to do the leaks, which is how these stories have been reported. He hasn't been leaking to us document by document and determining which stories get published. He turned over to us many thousands of documents weeks and weeks ago back in Hong Kong, when he was in Hong Kong and when I was as well, and we've been the ones deciding which stories get published and in which order. So as far as I know, he doesn't have any intention of disclosing any more documents to us. He gave us all the documents that he thinks we ought to have and that the public already ought to know many weeks ago.
Well, Glenn, given the fact that you have said you still have thousands of pages of documents and the U.S. government's concern about the release of those documents, I know you said yesterday on Fox that you haven't received any pressure from the U.S. government, but have you had any further communication with them on this, given the trove of material that you have on hand and the fact that you are effectively the spigot that controls its release?
We go to the U.S. government before we publish every story, like we would do with anyone on whom we're reporting, and ask them to comment, and we've published the comments of the U.S. government on every story. We also give them an opportunity to make arguments to the Guardian editors about whether any of this material should be suppressed in the name of national security. And as far as I know, in fact, I do know that not a single document has been suppressed at their request because none of their claims is at all persuasive. They never offer anything specific. They simply say, don't publish this because it'll harm national national security, but never offer any concrete reasons why. And so we've rejected those arguments and have published everything in the public good. I don't think there's a credible argument to make that we've harmed national security. What we've done is inform the debate. But I don't think the U.S. government thinks that trying to pressure us or me out of continuing to publish these stories will do them any good. And so as far as I know, there hasn't been any kind of pressure like that.
You know, Glenn, while there has been extraordinary focus on Snowden and where he is in Russia, whether or not where he is seeking asylum, there is actually movement afoot in the United States to act on some of the secrets or the NSA programs that Edward Snowden made clear and revealed to the American public. And I wonder what you think of the action in the Senate and the action in the courts, the fact that the state secrets privilege may not be invoked to the degree that it has been thus far, that it may not be the prop that the government stands on to prevent any of this stuff from coming to light. Are you satisfied with what is going on? And where are you optimistic? Where are you most optimistic in terms of change happening? Is it the courts that we can look to for the biggest amount of progress?
I agree with you, Alex. I mean, I think there has been, an awful lot of media focus on trivialities, but I think the political system and the political culture, both in the United States and internationally, remember this is a big international story, have taken these disclosures very seriously, and there are a lot of encouraging and gratifying trends, as you just suggested. There's all sorts of movement in the United States Senate and the Congress to mandate much greater disclosure when it comes to the decisions of the FISA court. This idea that we should have a secret court enacting secret law that determines the contours of our constitutional liberty, I think, is striking all sorts of people as incredibly tyrannical. The idea that James Clapper, the top-level Obama national security official, went before Congress and lied to their faces, which is a felony, when asked whether or not the NSA is collecting millions of records indiscriminately about Americans, and it turned out, as our reporting showed, that they're doing exactly that, which he deceitfully denied. There's calls now for accountability, meaning for him to be fired. You heard Carl Levin, the loyal Democrat, suggest that that was the only way to provide accountability. I think even in the courts, there's movement in the FISA court to say that there was a decision in 2011 that found that the United States government, the Obama administration, was violating the law and the Constitution in how they were spying on American citizens. And the FISA court says we have no objection to having the American people know about our 80-page ruling. This ought to be released. So I think it's really radically changed how people understand what the NSA is doing, the proper limits of secrecy, and the kinds of powers that our political leaders should be able to exercise in the dark.
I got to ask you, Glenn, because Edward Snowden, when all of these leaks first came out, said just because effectively we're spying on folks who are not American doesn't make it right. And at the same time, he is seeking a refuge in countries with abysmal human rights records. And he even went as far as to say the other day that he wanted to congratulate the leaders of Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Russia for standing up on this issue and being protectors of human rights. Given their records domestically, is that not hypocritical?
No, and I'll tell you why, for a couple of reasons. First of all, people seek asylum from persecution in the United States all the time, and the United States government continuously grants asylum. And I never hear any member of the U.S. media ever saying, isn't it odd that these people are seeking asylum in a country that established a worldwide torture regime and that rendered people and kidnapped them and that put them in cages in Guantanamo without charges of any kind, or that it invaded and destroyed a country of 26 million people in Iraq and have all sorts of human rights abuses? Because the idea of asylum is that countries under international law are supposed to protect you from persecution that you're enduring at home, from which you're fleeing. Now, obviously, he isn't going to Venezuela or Ecuador or Bolivia or Nicaragua or Russia or wherever he ends up because he thinks they're bastions of civil liberties protections. He's going there because, as Daniel Ellsberg said in a Washington Post op-ed, this country is no longer safe for whistleblowers. The Obama administration is waging an unprecedented war on people who blow the whistle on government misconduct. And of course he has to go somewhere. There are very few places in the world willing to stand up to the United States and demand that his rights under the law be protected. His choices are very limited, and he's trying to make sure that he doesn't end up like Bradley Manning, put in a cage, rendered incommunicado. He wants to participate in the ongoing debate that he helped provoke, and that's what's guiding his choices.
The Guardian's Glenn Greenwald, a developing story if ever there was one. Thanks for your time.